Good evening. I'm Jim Gierak. Welcome to the second edition of Chicago's War on Drugs. Today is April 11th, 2017. For the next 12 weeks, each Tuesday at 7 p.m. on this station, we will encourage you and our guests to go where few leaders have gone before. We will explore the question, which is worse, drugs or the war on drugs? There is no right or wrong answer on this show. This is simply an important heart-to-heart discussion regarding drug prohibition and whether it should continue or change. This series of 13 shows, tonight is the second show, is brought to you courtesy of Azteca Baseball League, a not-for-profit organization that can be reached at its website. You'll see on the screen Azteca Baseball League with a website address. You can also contact them by the phone number shown or at drugnews1@yahoo.com. Now, tonight it is my pleasure to welcome Alderman Rod Sawyer, who is the boss of the 6th Ward on Chicago's South Side. He also happens to be the president of the Black Caucus of the City Council of Chicago. It's an honor to have you here and to be with you.
Appreciate it.
And to take up this subject of drug policy. In America since Nixon in 1971, we have been fighting a war on drugs and trying to make our streets safe from drugs and make life better for our citizens. And yet, what's happened?
It's gotten worse.
In not only the drug problem, but in the violence problem.
Absolutely.
Now, it seems to me that we should have learned during the 1920s with alcohol prohibition that when people want something and you outlaw it, you end up with violence.
That's correct. And it's unfortunate that we have not learned from that lesson over 90, almost 100 years ago, and yet here we are today still fighting a losing war that we cannot possibly win.
Well, it seemed like we learned the lesson because we went headstrong into prohibition. We ended up with Al Capone and Elliot Nusses and the battles on the street, and the Packards are going down with Tommy guns and people being shot and bars, speakeasies being blown up. Right. And the people within 13 years recognized this doesn't work, and they repealed the Prohibition Amendment. But yet the war on drugs, which is basically the reincarnation of prohibition, has been in place since 1971, the Nixon war on drugs. So why are we so slow to learn this time around?
It's a confusing set of circumstances, and I really don't know. I see that we're making some progress in certain states, but until we acknowledge that we've lost that war and try to deal with people on a health matter as opposed to a legal matter, we're going to continue to lose this war on drugs. It will never be solved. Mm-hmm. People are going to continue to use certain drugs. I'm not asking a reason why. It's just going to happen.
Sure.
And I think the wise thing for us to do is what some of the other states are doing now with Colorado and Washington State and California and others. Look at the option of legalization and taxation and also education.
With the criminalization system, we've ended up with so much trouble that Americans have asked themselves, is America winning the war on drugs? And this was a poll I put on the screen here by Rasmussen, which was done in 2014, and people were asked, is America winning the war on drugs? And 3% said yes, and 83% no, and 14% were undecided. Well, that's 2 years or 3 years ago. Maybe the rest are decided.
Maybe decided by now.
So it's 3% to all the rest. But if so many people in America recognize that we're losing this war on drugs, why is there not marching on City Hall? why is there not marching on the state capitol? Why are people not marching on the capitol in Washington, D.C. to demand an end to this war on drugs?
I believe the concept of drugs is still taboo to a large scale of the population, and particularly the older segment of the population. And so they still believe that when you mention the word drugs, it's automatic. They're thinking of the addict on the street, the criminal aspect of it, and they're not thinking about those that may consider or those that are capable of being recreational drug users or smoking some marijuana every so often, and not being succumbed by it, not having this be a part of their life. I've always equated it. It was a movie. It's a kids movie years ago, but they say it's a lot different from sparking one up at a party and just being high all your life. There's a big difference. Just like alcohol, there's some people that just cannot handle alcohol. One drop and they're a raving maniac, but some that can be responsible, have a glass of wine with dinner, or go out with friends and have a cocktail and come home, enjoyed but not overserved. It can happen.
It seems like we've demonized drugs, like we think that we've invented this new horrible thing that didn't exist before, and yet the poppy plant, the marijuana plant, the coca plant have been here forever.
Forever.
And in many parts of the world have been medicine. Of course, in the United States, opiates are medicine. Well, if you put it into a pill bottle and you get a prescription, it's medicine. If it's sold on the street and it's heroin in a dark corner in a police car going by, it's a crime.
Right.
So I don't know how, maybe it was because we demonized and we said we're going to put in place a Just Say No program. We're going to be not just intolerant, but we're going to be zero tolerant with other people.
Well, even going back, for example, with the marijuana, hemp had all types of uses, not just inhaling it or smoking it. It had industrial uses. It was big in industry, used as rope and other things. And you may know it better than I. I know there was a situation when marijuana was declared a Schedule I drug, which is really strange. It was really more for the sake of undermining an industry as opposed to stopping drug use.
Sure.
Yeah.
Reportedly, Hearst, who owned a lot of newspapers, was interested in hemp. That the U.S. Constitution was written on, not be in our grade schools. So it's just a shame because the violence is so epidemic. Everybody thinks of Prohibition, Al Capone, and they think of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And at the beginning of this month, April, we had as many people killed in Chicago the same day, and an extra 9 people or so shot. So
it's horrible.
One of the things that strikes me about drug prohibition that makes it so much worse is, because alcohol is a bulky substance, you had to have trucks and warehouses to store the stuff and to move the stuff around. So to go into the alcohol business in the Capone day, you needed capital. You needed money to start with. But what do you need to go into the drug prohibition today? You need a pair of gym shoes and a gun, and you're in.
You're in.
And as a consequence, we
need a couple of $1 million, and you can get in it legally. While those same guys in gym shoes are not getting access to the lucrative market, which is now either medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. It's a boom, and they're not. The look of the new marijuana salesman is a rich white male, not a black youth that could benefit from being involved in the trade as opposed to those that are already wealthy.
There's a professional football coach whose son has opened one of these places you're talking about in Colorado.
Yeah.
But we won't mention names. But I think it's kind of interesting to even look at the way things are here in Chicago. This is the headline of the Chicago Sun-Times, December 20th, 1992. And it talks about a $7 billion addiction, the drug trade in the cities and the suburbs. And it says the illegal drug industry employs 20,000 workers and has 400,000 customers in metropolitan Chicago. We have known since 1992 that prohibition ends up with this kind of absurd result, with so much money going to drug cartels and street gangs in Chicago. And yet, we're still putting the same policy in place that we had when we started in 1992.
I remember in 1992 when we had, I kind of remember this article in the discussion that occurred around that time. I was fresh out of law school and working with some groups that were trying to quell the violence in the inner city areas in Chicago. And, you know, that was a big thing in the 80s and going into the 90s. Drugs were big money. It was big business. And we didn't learn then about taking the profit out of the drug and trying to get people, you know, I'm not advocating people using drugs. I'm saying that, you know, if you have a problem and you can't handle it, this should be a medical solution, not a criminal solution. You want to make sure that those that are getting treatment for substance abuse, if they're abusing whatever they're abusing, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be chocolate, you know, whatever it is.
Chocolate. That's me.
You know, but you want to make sure that the people are getting treated and they can overcome the addiction and lead fruitful lives. And those that, you know, there's certain people, let's be honest, and people don't like to talk about it, there's certain people that can handle certain drugs and certain people that cannot. You know, you might know people that have an opiate addiction or opiate use, I won't say addiction, that lead fruitful lives, go to work every day and raise their families and do everything necessary. But another person could, you know, have one hit of this stuff and go crazy and can't live without it, and selling their souls to be a part of it. So
yeah, I mentioned on the program last week that we had a deputy sheriff of Cook County come into my law office, and he said, "I'd like to pay your retainer." And I said, well, why? He said, "Well, in case I get in trouble." And I said, "Well, why would you get in trouble?" He said, "Well, I'm a heroin addict, and I take 75 milligrams of methadone a day," and he was on the way to go to the juvenile court where he works with our kids. And he said, "You know, I've been doing this for so many years, it's like medicine. Somebody would take insulin. Well, I need methadone, and I function fine, and I'm no danger." I see we have a caller.
Yes, and good evening, and thank you for taking this call. And it's amazing, if you listen enough, you're going to hear something which y'all guys said. And that's amazing about the sheriff. But it's not surprising. Let me tell you, you're talking about the war on drugs in 92. How about in the 60s? The war on drugs is a very popular way to make money. Hell, it makes more money on the stock market than anything you could think of. It's a joke to actually say the war on drugs. If you want to stop something, anything could be stopped. But again, you got people now these days, there's no functional addicts out here. I ain't never met a functional addict. A person who drinks sometimes, or maybe who might take a puff on a joint. But
caller, let's ask our guest. Thank you for the call.
I want to finish because you took me off last week.
Thank you for the call.
Let me take that lean, that Molly. How about those things? You don't say anything about those things. That's what's going on right now.
All right. The caller seems to think that if we want to stop something, we can stop it. Do you have a comment?
well, if we wanted to, I think that he's somewhat correct. I think that if it's something that we really wanted to stop, now I may sound conspiratorial, but do we really want to stop drugs from being a part of this country? Is it a part of a business venture? I don't know. I don't want to sound too, conspiratorial, but I understand what he's saying, but I do disagree with him saying that I think there are functional drug users out in society. I think there are people that can stop at whatever, I don't know what dose, how heroin, if you can take it in whatever form outside of shooting it up. I'm sure that people operate, quite regularly, and I did know a gentleman in my law office years ago, I had a part-time clerk who was the beneficiary of using methadone to keep his addiction in check, and was an excellent clerk. I mean, did good work for me.
And he had a job.
He had a job.
And
He
he
came
was
every day.
Staying out of
He
trouble.
worked every day, stayed out of trouble. But
Yeah.
on occasions, I would take him to the clinic, which was in the neighborhood, and where he was able to get his methadone dispensed.
But, you know, this idea that we could stop drugs from coming in if we really cared. Well, we have spent an absolute fortune in America trying to keep drugs out, and yet we can't keep drugs out of a prison. There's not a prison in the United States or the world that doesn't have illicit substances. In fact, the fact of the matter is that the harder we try to suppress drugs, the more we end up with. Here is a picture of our superintendent of police, Terry Hilliard, with absolutely a snow fort of cocaine in front of him, which are prohibited drugs which were collected, transported, distributed, produced, and came to Chicago because of the war on drugs. And then here's a picture of our past superintendent, Gary McCarthy, where again we're inundated. We had 8 truckloads, 8 tons of marijuana that came into the United States. Now it seems like a lot, 8 tons, and
Probably
it looks
just a drop. Yeah.
it's Mexico, according to the U.S. Department of Justice Intelligence Division, says that Mexico produces 21,500 tons of marijuana a year. And 8 tons is a drop in the bucket, hardly worth a stop and frisk. So we have another caller.
I'm going to make a quick comment. First of all, I don't feel sorry for these drug addicts because, first of all, they medicated. And when you look at in terms of insurance, and wonder why you can't get some insurance in places, insurance company paying at least about maybe anywhere between $3,000 and $7,000 a day for them to dry out. And like that deputy sheriff, he could probably afford his half because you know the reason why? Because he probably getting paid look-away money. That's part of the problem. And you got people that making money constantly on other people's misery. And go ahead, Steve. I know you're going to call back. You're going to make some type of comment. What I'm saying, the bottom line, these people are self-medicated. I don't feel sorry for them because we look at places like Haymarket. Guess what? The place is run like a damn hotel. Bye.
All right. Well, thank you, caller. Do you have any comment? It doesn't sound like this gentleman has too much sympathy for somebody who might have had surgery and then became addicted
To a
innocently.
payment, yeah. I mean, because it does happen.
Sure.
And again, those people deserve treatment, not to be ostracized and
Yeah.
criminalized.
You know, it seems like the caller was a bit concerned because of the cost that we spend to try to help people who've voluntarily acquired an addiction. And not thinking that we paid $112 million in police overtime this year to help fight our crazy war on drugs.
Yes.
We have gone in this country from a prison population of 300,000 when Nixon declared the war on drugs to 2.3 million people behind bars. The United States, the land of the free, has become the prison capital of the world because of the war on drugs. No country has more prisoners than the United States, the gulag of the world because of the war on drugs. And to show you the impossibility of the effort to quell drug use by using a criminalization system, the United Nations, I keep hitting the wrong button. The United Nations Secretariat prepares a report each year to the Commission on Narcotic Drugs in Vienna. And in that report on the world situation with regard to drug abuse, reported that in 2012, between 3.5% to 7% of the people of the world aged 15 to 64 were estimated to have illicitly used substance at least once during the previous year. The prison population of the world is roughly 10 million people, and they're estimating 160 to 300 and some million people. We obviously can't build prisons to extricate ourselves from this intolerance over drugs that just causes so much crime and makes life so miserable for so many people here in Chicago. I found it was interesting. Did you happen to hear the superintendent of police? He was down in Springfield to testify for tougher gun penalties.
Yes, for repeat gun offenders.
Yeah,
Yes,
and he said that it's the drug trade which drives the gang violence in Chicago.
Yes.
And so you've got a drug policy that causes a gang problem, that causes the violence, so he says change the gun laws rather than change the drug laws.
Policy.
It doesn't follow.
Well, I understand his concern about the immediate issue, but again, we need to solve the long term, the underlying cause, which is the drug trade.
Mm-hmm.
If we start getting rid of the profitability in drugs, we can eliminate the criminal element in drugs, and therefore we can hopefully steer somebody into some positive direction, into something else. And people get into it because, like I said, it's fast money. It's dangerous money, obviously, because of the criminality associated with it. But we need to make sure that we can get people away. Those that are addicted and have problems need to get treatment. Those that feel that, and at least my opinion, in the area of like marijuana, for example, that can handle it on a social level, legalize it, tax it, get us a bottom line and increase our economy.
When we take a policeman off of a murder or armed robbery or a rape case, and we end up assigning them to find out who's voluntarily buying and selling drugs between consensual users, we end up engaging in morality policing instead of policing that's designed to protect the public health and safety.
I've always had a problem when we try to police what consenting adults do. If consenting adults want to, if you want to poke yourself in the eye, I don't advise it. I don't think you should do it. But if that's what you want to do, far be it for me to question you. I may question you, but that's your choice. If you want to overdrink, I don't think you should. But if you're at home and you decide to drink half a bottle of vodka or whatever, and no one can stop you. That's your personal choice. It's not a wise choice, but choice nonetheless.
I'm a former drug prosecutor, a former homicide prosecutor in Chicago, and I'm against people using drugs. But I'm even more in favor of people having the right to decide for themselves how they're going to live their life and what they'll do and what they'll not do. Individuals should choose not to use drugs, not government telling you can't use drugs.
It's freedom of choice.
It's just called freedom.
It's freedom.
Liberty. Constitution. And yet we've engaged in every means to try to dissuade people from exercising their freedoms, whether wisely or not. Well, is there anything else you'd like to get in? We're down to about 5 minutes.
Well, I just want people to understand that this is something that's extremely serious, and I have a particular take on it because I'm particularly concerned about those African Americans and others that have been placed on jail unjustly for mere possession violations, and they're in jail sometimes for years and years because all they did was either buy or consume a drug. I think it's the most ridiculous thing, and we wonder why we have the prison population that we do, because our laws are so archaic and they're, I guess I can't keep saying it again, ridiculous. It's silly. So I'm hoping that we'll continue, and I hope you continue this conversation and get more people involved, particularly on the state and the federal level where they can make that decision, and let people know that this is something that we need to make a wholesale change.
Well, I want to, while we still have a minute, I want to thank you because there's so many politicians who are accustomed to collecting votes by saying we're going to get tough, crack down, take back our street, build more prisons, rather than talk about the problem more realistically. Recognizing that we have 30,000 people released from the Illinois prison systems every year with people with records. What do they think they're going to do for a living? So I really congratulate you for having the courage to come forward and talk sense about drugs instead of just lock them up and throw the key away.
It's not a problem. Be happy to do it anytime.
Yeah. Alderman Sawyer, it's an honor and a privilege, and I hope our listeners and viewers have enjoyed this frank discussion about Chicago's war on drugs. I'm Jim Gierach. Thank you for joining us.